Okay, there are 65 slides in this lesson, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to go through all of them for this lecture, but I'm going to attempt to do it in one recording. It may take several recordings. The reason for this slideshow is to explain the historical background of infectious disease prevention, identify types of microorganisms that can cause disease, list some infectious diseases and identify their signs and symptoms, and discuss the importance of preventing antibiotic resistance in a healthcare setting. We're going to describe the ways that you can help prevent antibiotic resistance in healthcare settings. Explain the disease process, explain how the body's defenses protect against infection, describe the cycle of infection, identify and describe the various methods of disease transmission, and explain how you can break the cycle of infection. This is where we're going to look at our bodies and the natural structures that defend against infections under normal circumstances. You will learn about disease-causing microorganisms, how the body fights disease, and ways infection occurs. You'll learn about antibiotic-resistant organisms and importance of patient education on the proper use of antibiotics. Throughout history, people have attempted to discover causes of infection, how to prevent infections, and how to treat infections. From 1749 to 1823, Edward Jenner developed the first effective vaccines, used cowpox to vaccinate against smallpox in humans. Egon Semmelweis, 1818 to 1865, and Oliver Wendell Holmes, 1809 to 1894, promoted hand washing as a means for reducing the spread of puerperal fever to women in childbirth. It's important to know you don't need to know the dates here, but you just need to know who the individuals are. Louis Pasteur helped develop the germ theory in infectious disease, stating that disease is caused by microorganisms. Joseph Lister, you might recognize that name by Listerine, and Pasteur from pasteurization. Helped develop germ theory, introduced aseptic techniques through use of antiseptics on wounds, surgical sites, and surgical instruments. Robert Koch, in 1843 to 1910, developed a set of proofs known as Koch postulates, claiming that microbes cause diseases, and Sir Alexander Fleming, 1881 to 1955, he's the one who discovered penicillin. The history of infectious disease prevention, remarkable advances in the past century. The threat of infection is still present. There are new diseases such as AIDS, Ebola, and even if you're watching the news lately, you see where there are these new AIDS-like diseases over in Europe, as well as the in the Yosemite National Park, where there's a rodent type of disease that's being passed around there. There are different types of resistant diseases, MRSA, VRSA, and multi-drug resistant TB. If you look at I'm going to skip through the question and answer since we're doing this show on video here. Microorganisms live all around us. Pathogens are considered to be everywhere and a part of everything. Microorganisms capable of causing disease. They can evade the host defenses, like we know with AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, which is a disease, a virus that attacks the soldiers, the resistant army of our body that keeps us safe from disease. It attacks the soldiers and then lowers our immune system, which is where we become susceptible to inopportunistic infections. People avoid infections most of the time. Many microorganisms are beneficial or harmless. Normal defenses resist infection. Conditions are not favorable for pathogens to grow or be transmitted. Sanitizing, hand washing, all of these things have become a standard and norm in our society. The microorganisms, there are prions, which are infection particle made of protein. No nucleic acid. Reproduction is unknown. Example would be PRP, and then there's several diseases that come from that: CJD, BSE, and mad cow disease. Experts disagree as to whether prions are directly responsible for disease or merely an aid, an unknown agent in causing disease. Viruses, DNA or RNA, surrounded by protein coat, reproduced in living cells, very small. Varicella zoster virus, and this is known as chickenpox. Bacteria, single-celled, reproduce quickly, mostly asexual production. Vibrio chlori, and this is known as the disease of chloria. Protozoan, single-celled, reproduction, mostly asexual. Entomibia histolycta. It's an ambient dysentery. Is a disease that can be found with protozoans. Fungi, multicellular, reproduction is sexual and asexual. Candida albicans and candidiasis. Candidiasis. Helminths, multicellular, parasitic, contain special organized sexual reproduction. Interribius vermicularis, also known as pinworms. Just so you know, it's only important to know the types of diseases here and what classification they're in. It's important to know. I doubt that any of that will be on the test. Here's the review question as we go along. Infectious diseases. Knowing signs and symptoms of common infectious diseases can help protect against exposure. Infectious diseases, here's a picture of chickenpox, and the reason this is important for mental health professionals is because we work around people who are at high risk for some type of illness or disease because of the riskiness of impaired behavior. So we'll talk about that more and more in a few slides. And here's some information on chickenpox, the common cold, croup, diphtheria. The slides are posted here, so I'm going to go through each of these and definitely just go back through and take a look at each one of these. Epstein-Barr virus, Haemophilus influenzae type B, which is your bacterial infections in infants. Hepatitis A, B, C, or non-hep C is what it's non-hep A and B, which is now hepatitis C. HIV and AIDS, which is human immunodeficiency virus, or which is the HIV, which is the actual virus in your system, and then it can lead to or cause what we call acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Influenza or the flu, the common flu. Measles, rubella. Meningitis, which is something that many of you may have heard about here recently when the state legislature passed a state law saying that all incoming college students have to have proof of meningitis vaccination in high schools and colleges if they're under the age of 30 years old. Meningitis is a very serious, life-threatening bacterial infection. Mumps, pertussis, or what's called whooping cough, and there's been a really bad breakout of that recently. Rosella, rubella, which is German measles. Strep throat, which is streptococcal pharyngitis. Tetanus, which is something that you will all have to get a shot, tetanus shot before you go into work in the field, and keep that up to date. Tuberculosis, TB, you'll be tested for TB also before you go to work in the field in your practicum sites or in your intern sites. TB is very important to know about TB because of all of the diseases that you will see commonly in the field, TB is one that you're going to see your clients have on a regular basis. Some drug-resistant microorganisms, what you might hear is that someone that certain viruses or diseases may become resistant to the type of treatments or drugs. Here's a list of some of the drug-resistant microorganisms. You don't need to know these for the test or for working, especially not since we're working in the behavioral health clinics. You really need to know about the most common, which was the most common diseases, which are slides number. Let's see, this is slide number 17. Definitely want to have a good working knowledge of slides 17 through 37, so those 20 slides. Drug-resistant microorganisms, the risk of those factors for development of infections by drug-resistant organisms is advanced age, someone who's elderly, invasive procedures, prior use of antibiotics or overuse of antibiotics, to the point to where your system, the virus grows resistant, or the organisms grow resistant to the treatment, repeated contact with healthcare systems, severity of illness, and underlying diseases or concerns. What happens is a way that you can prevent antibiotic resistance by microorganisms is by prevent infection, diagnose and treat infection appropriately, use antibiotics carefully, and prevent transmission of infections. The disease process begins with microorganisms finding a host, finding a way into the host, grow with specific requirements, proper temperature, pH balance, and moisture level. Virulence is a microorganism's disease-producing power, or virulence. Damage is caused by depleting nutrition, reproducing themselves, making body cells the target of their own body's own defenses, and then producing toxins within the host. Those are some important names to know. You need to know what a host is. A host is a host organ where the organisms would find to grow, and then you need to know each of these terms that are throughout the slideshow when it talks about specific areas of the disease process. Once exposed to a pathogen, the body goes through 4 stages of illness. Incubation begins at first exposure, ends when first symptoms appear. Prodromal begins at the first onset of symptoms, generally short. Invasion, numbers of organisms are greatest, symptoms are most pronounced. Convalescent, patient regains normal health status. The body has a natural built-in defense, our immunity, conditioned to being resistant to pathogens and disease they cause. First lines of defense is our skin, our sweat glands, mucous membranes, cilia, lacrimal glands, saliva, hydrochloric acid, and lysozyme. You can tell I'm a counselor, not a doctor. The body defenses are resistant to normal flora. Microorganisms found in the body provide a barrier against pathogens, normally live in balance with our body. Those are the normal present microorganisms, become pathogenic when host defenses are compromised. And this can cause what I talked about earlier, which is an opportunistic infection. Infections in which a host resistance is low. In other words, normally your immune system would be built up enough to fight off this type of infection, but because your immune system is low, the infection is able to cause damage. The immune system includes non-specific defenses. Mechanisms to protect against pathogens in general includes non-specific defenses, humoral defenses, and cell-mediated defenses. Some ways that you can tell that there is an issue: your body's defense will show redness, localized heat, swelling, or pain. Purpose is to summon immunologic agents to the site, begin tissue repair, and destroy invading microorganisms. Any of you have ever had a cut or a sore that it may have swollen up and gotten red and pussy? That's because your body is trying to heal itself. Steps: the initial construction, then dilation of blood vessels causing redness and heat, fluid leakage from local vessel swelling, and scar tissue formation. Chronic inflammation damages tissues and causes permanent loss of function. The body's defenses includes, I can't even say that, cytosis, white blood cells, or hagocytes, engulf and digest the pathogens, as seen in the picture here on this slide. There's 3 types: neutrophils found in pus, monocytes formed in the bone marrow and become macrophages when they migrate to specific tissues, found in lymph nodes, liver, spleen, lungs, bone marrow, and connective tissue. They deliver antigens, foreign substances, to the lymphocytes. The lymphocytes is the B cells and the T cells. If you've ever had much research into HIV, the T cells are the ones that HIV will attack. T cells activate B cells to produce antibodies and neutralize antigen. Memory B cells respond quickly to produce antibodies in a later invasions. Specific antibodies are produced in response to specific antigens. Antibodies attract phagocytes, which destroy antigens. Types of immunity is active, body produces own antibodies, natural active, artificial active, and passive antibodies that are produced outside and the body and inner, natural, passive, or artificial passive. Complement, proteins have activated by antibodies, helps white blood cells destroy pathogens. So you have your natural built-in defense mechanisms. Cell-mutated immunity, T cells attack invading pathogen directly. There are helper T cells that activate, killer T cells bind with antigen and kill it, and suppressor T cells slow down or stop attack after antigen is destroyed. And memory T cells respond quickly to another attack by the same antigen. Okay, cycle of infection, a reservoir host, animal, insect, or human body capable of sustaining a pathogen growth. The carrier may be unaware of the presence of the pathogen. A subclinical case, unnoticeable infection. A indigenous infection, normally harmless microorganisms become pathogenic because of some type of issue with the host. And then pathogen introduced into the body, and this becomes what we know of as the cycle of infection. Means of exit, how the pathogen leaves the host, either through nose, mouth, eyes, or ears, feces, urine, semen, vaginal fluid, or other reproductive discharge, blood, or blood products. And that's where the pathogen is carried throughout the body, and then that's how it's transmitted from one person to the other. Cycle of infection, the means of transportation is how a pathogen spreads to a host, either airborne, bloodborne, during pregnancy or birth, foodborne, vector-borne. Living organism that carries macroorganisms to another person, touching, direct, indirect through fomites, an inanimate reservoir of pathogens, and drinking, glass, doorknob, etc. The cycle of infection, the means of entrance, enter through any cavity lined with mucous membrane. That's the mouth, the nose, vagina, or rectum. Ears, eyes, intestinal tract, urinary tract, reproductive tract, breaks in the skin. Anytime your skin has a sore or any type of break, then that's at an area that's at higher risk for infection. The cycle of infection, someone who is susceptible may already have low or no immunity, and they become susceptible to infection by a pathogen. Host factors influencing susceptibility: age, genetic predisposition, nutritional status, other disease process, stress levels, hygiene habits, and general health. Pathogen factors include number of concentration, virulence, and point of entry. This is an example of the cycle of infection. It shows a reservoir host, a means of exit. He sneezes over the glass of water there. The means of transmission is the water. Means of entrance, the person picks up the water that he just sneezed on, and then that becomes a susceptible host. Fun, isn't it? That's why you have to make sure anytime that you have a drink or something that you have a lid on it, especially when you're working in the facility. Some environmental factors: dense populations, animals, unpasteurized milk, insects. You know, there's a lot of talk about the West Nile virus around the Dallas and Houston areas. Economic and political factors, availability of transportation, population growth rates, and sexual behavior. Okay, and now asepsis, which is what we're going to focus on for this week's quiz, is the cycle of asepsis. Asepsis is a condition in which pathogens are absent or controlled. Maintain strict housekeeping, adhere to government guidelines to protect against disease, and then educate patients in hygiene, health promotion, and disease prevention. As knowledge about causes of infection have increased, principles of practices of asepsis have developed. The main thing is, in today's world, new infectious diseases can spread across the country and even across the world in a matter of days or even hours, making early detection critical. This concludes the review of the medical office, and we will talk more about asepsis when we get to hand washing, but this is talking about infection and disease control, and it should prepare you for the quiz on infection and disease control if you need to go back and look at each of the areas or print out the slides to have something to review by. I'll see you back in class next week. Thanks.